In this video, we're going to talk about the different efficiencies that you see on electrical cooling. The three efficiencies that we are going to look at is EER, COP, and kW per ton. EER stands for energy efficiency ratio, and COP stands for coefficient of performance, and the kW per ton is just a unit that's looking at the kW power per tons of cooling. So first thing I want to talk about is what a ton of cooling is. So a ton of cooling is 12,000 BTUs per hour. So when we're looking at the kW per ton number, we're saying how many kW does it take for 1 ton of cooling to occur. Now EER is a measurement of watts per BTU. COP is a measurement of BTU per BTU, and the kW per ton is kilowatts per ton of cooling. So let's look at making some converting some of these units of efficiency into each other. So let's first go EER to COP and kW per ton. So we're starting off now with an EER. So let's say our EER is 13.0. So in order to convert that EER into a COP, you need to divide it by 3.413. And if you notice what the units are, we've got watts per BTU in EER, and we've got BTU per BTU in COP. So what we're doing is we're converting the watts out of there by knowing that we've got 3.413 BTUs per watt. So if we divide 13.0 divided by 3.413, we get a COP of 3.81. The next thing we're going to look at is kW per ton. Now, to do a kW per ton, you will notice that we're looking at tons of cooling on this side, and BTUs, let's use this blue here, and we're looking at kW compared to watts. So we know the difference between watts and kilowatts is 1,000. So you can think of taking the 12,000 BTUs per hour for a ton of cooling, divide that by 1,000, and now you've got a formula that's looking at 12 instead of 12,000, because we're taking out the thousands by knowing that that's the difference between kilowatts and watts. And so to do this, what we need to do is if we take 12 divided by the EER, which is 13.0, it equals 0.92 kW per ton. So a good rule of thumb to think about when you're thinking of kW per ton is an EER of 12 is 1 kW per ton. And the higher the energy efficiency ratio, the better performance it gets. And so you want a higher number, so EER is higher equals better performance. On kW per ton, because you're looking at how many kilowatts of power it takes to do a ton of cooling, lower equals better. So when converting between EER and COP, where you want a higher number, and kW per ton, where you want the lower number, and you think of 12 as the threshold where 12 equals 1 kW per ton, if your EER that you're converting from is higher than 12, then you know that the kW per ton has to be lower than 1. If the EER is lower than 12, then you know it has to be higher than 1 kW per ton. So if you're converting, for example, here, 13 EER, and instead of getting 0.92, you get, let's see, pardon my pause here, you get 1.08. That means that you inverse this 12 and 13, so you did 13 divided by 12, and you got 1.08 kW per ton. And since you know 13 is higher than 12, so higher efficiency than an EER of 12, you know that this number has to be less than 1. So now let's do it a couple other ways. Now let's start with the COP. So now we're going to go from COP to EER to kW per ton. And now let's look at a COP of 3. So to get COP into EER, we need to do 3 times 3.413, which equals 10.239. And now when converting that to kW per ton, we know it's 12 divided by 10.239, which equals 1.172 kW per ton. And again, looking at our logic, the EER is less than 12, and so we know that our kW per ton has to be higher than 1. Now, the last way we're going to convert this is by going from kW per ton to EER to COP. And let's say we've got a kW per ton of 0.8. So first off, we know for sure that the EER has to be higher than 12 because the kW per ton is lower than 1. So if we go 12 divided by 0.8, we get an EER of 15, which checks out. We got 15, which is higher than 12. kW per ton is lower than 1, so that checks. And then to get to COP, we know that COP is EER divided by 3.413. So we go 15 divided by 3.413, which equals a COP of 4.395. So again, this is another thing, much like the unit conversions, that you should be able to be very comfortable with switching between COP, EER, and kW per ton. This will come up a lot in homeworks as well as the midterm and final project.